All right, welcome everybody to the May 9th edition of FMDiSC. We have a little bit of an interesting situation today. Our original first slot presenter, Jeremy Brown, had something come up and he had to move to the second slot. And the second slot presenter, Corin Walker, has graciously agreed to move up his presentation to the beginning slot. And so he's going to kick things off for us. I had a hip pocket presentation just in case disaster befell us, but I didn't need it. So we're in luck. So anyway, Corn, you presented similar to this presentation, or maybe this exact presentation at Engage. I'll let you sort of introduce the topic and take it away.
Sure thing. Let's see. So, I mean, the disaster is just that I'm traveling right now. So it's not so much of a disaster, but there was a chance that I might not have Wi-Fi. I frequently work out of my car and it's usually fine, but there are still places in the country that don't have cell service, shockingly. And Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York, sort of the middle of those states are one of them. But fortunately, I am actually in an actual office at a coworker's house here in Ohio. So I have real Wi-Fi and everything. I don't know. So let's see, how do I share? I share desktop too. Okay. So this is going to be sort of based on and and really follow along with the Engage presentation. But I will probably make it more conversational because it's, we can actually all talk here and ask questions and interrupt and disagree with things as we like. But I'm using the same outline because I think the outline is correct, which is when I'm thinking about DevOps, what am I actually looking at? And one of the things is, DevOps has been around for a while. And here at Proofgeist, Ernest has been talking about DevOps for a while. And the biggest thing that we've struggled with is how do you do this with FileMaker? We don't just do FileMaker development. And so when we're looking at our web development, or I think we did one like iOS app, any of those processes, we can actually do we can adopt these traditional models. But with FileMaker, it's a little bit different. And for me, what it meant is like figuring out what DevOps is from an abstract level, and then what pieces we can apply to a FileMaker workflow, and what tools do we need to help with that. So for me, the point of DevOps, and I think for the point for everybody, is that it's about building efficiency. And when I was approaching this, I was trying to figure out like what are the core components of DevOps, and I came up with these three questions based on my understanding of what DevOps is. And by the way, this presentation here, I sort of threw it together in a week. Somebody else was supposed to give this presentation at Engage, and he had a family emergency, and they just sort of threw it at me and said, hey, you've got like 6 days to prepare. Good luck. So, so when I was kind of scrambling and trying to create a conceptual framework around this, and I thought about it in the terms of these three questions, like where is DevOps done? Who is doing the DevOps, and why are we doing the DevOps? And I sort of take them not necessarily in that order, but I think the biggest thing is why. Because if you answer the why question, that's where you get an understanding of why do we actually put in all of this effort? Because it's more effort. But the idea is that you invest all of this effort up front and you will get efficiency from the process. Now, I've been doing software development for like almost 3 decades now, most of that with FileMaker. But before that, I was actually writing things in like C, which everybody else at my company, they're like, ugh, gross. I don't know why. C is amazing. C is fast. C is almost as close to the metal as you can get. Unlike, I have also done some assembler programming as well. And, I don't know why anybody would do that, but C feels like it's the right level. It's like you're right at the hardware. You can really mess things up. And I think that's important because when I was first doing software development, we weren't thinking about any of this stuff. We were just really focused on, can we get it to work? So when I focused on why DevOps, I realized that it's really about the software development lifecycle. And that's the thing that I never, well, like when I was coming up in the 1940s, which is what it feels like now. That was a part that we didn't really talk about. It's like you wrote software and then you got it to work, and then it worked forever, because we were writing things in Fortran or COBOL or Forth or Ada or all of these other languages that I was forced to learn and program in. But we weren't really talking about like the life cycle of the software. I don't think we really even considered like, how would this thing run and for how long? And, I was surprised to find something that I wrote 20 years ago, they were still using it. And I was like, why? Why would you still use that? That's garbage. They should fire that developer who wrote that. But apparently software is long-lived, as people are discovering in the US government, that, things were written 50 years ago and they're still running. So in the beginning, there was this for software, and I didn't quite enter at this stage. I entered just after punch cards, but it was pretty close. I mean, I did do an internship at Cray supercomputer in Colorado, and that was pretty crazy. They didn't let me near the computers, by the way. But you would write the punch cards and everything, and the point of the software was like, you just wanted it to work because you were renting time on a computer. And if there were bugs in your code, you had to get back in line before you could run that software again. And today, what we're finding with ourselves is that the software is writing itself. We do a lot of web development. We like Cursor AI for our development, and it's pretty cool. And it's kind of crazy because we will give it a whole bunch of instructions and then say, go. And if you do it in YOLO mode, it will just go. It won't even ask you. It'll just start writing the software. Now it's still at this point, and I don't know, it may change. Right now, you still need to be an expert because it can do some things. And then, like one of the things we found is, we like to use specific frameworks. We're going to write React code, and what will happen is it will write things and it'll start using packages that we told it not to use. We're like, write this as a React app using the Mantine UI library, and it will write it using Tailwind or something. We're like, wait, what? Like, we did not say to do that. So it still needs somebody there, but it's getting faster. It's getting to the point where we're really about, not so much about the typing of software, but the actual management of it. And Claris is making some baby steps in this direction. I think it's somewhat good that they're being cautious, but I am also encouraging them that, move faster, because otherwise we're really in danger of getting left behind. So when I look at development, I look at the old way, and specifically with FileMaker, this is the process that most of us followed. We would either build it locally or on production. We would test it, maybe, sometimes. Usually we use the actual users as our testers. And we had to deploy it to the software. One of the largest projects I ever worked on was for Holiday Inn. And with that project, the manager of one of their reservation call centers said that he absolutely hated the software that they had to use at the time. It was a Holiday Inn at the time. They used a Mac application. They had all Macs in the reservation center. They used an application called Herman, and Herman was written and it communicated to their mainframes. They had two mainframes, one in Salt Lake City, one in Atlanta. And it used a TN3270 session and some software to scrape the screen off of that and then send commands over that. And it was absolutely crazy. And the reservations manager, I was just there to do some Mac networking for them. And they said, hey, somebody, I went to the store and said, I hated my software. And he gave me this. And he held up a box of FileMaker and said, do you think you could run the reservation center on this? And being the naive 20-something-year-old that I was like, sure, why not? And so I wrote their reservation system in FileMaker. It was FileMaker 4.1 because I needed to communicate with an Oracle personal application on the desktop as well. And I just sort of did things. I didn't even think about software development lifecycle. I didn't think about testing or anything. I wasn't quite just throwing the code over the wall, but what would happen is I would write all of the code locally because I couldn't do it while they're actively taking reservations. And then I would go in like on a Saturday night or early Sunday morning to do the update. And it was painful. There was, I think, the file sizes, I had to worry about that. So I had to archive all this old data. Still, there was like 83 million reservations that had to be maintained because they were relatively recent. The file sizes were constantly near the max of what FileMaker could support at the time. And the imports took forever. And the big part of this was that while it was doing those imports, they couldn't take reservations. And so all of those calls had to be transferred to another center. So that call center was losing money because the software was down for so long. And because I didn't really have a test environment, there was no way to really just to test this stuff to make sure it's working. It was just sort of like, I made some changes, I made some improvements, and I prayed. And I think a lot of people were doing that in the early years. Because one of the things I didn't realize, I guess, I mean, I'm both old and not that old, but I didn't realize that it wasn't until about 2000 that the Agile Manifesto was released. And I could have sworn it was like in 1980 or something. Like it couldn't be that young. But then I also realized that 2000 was like 25 years ago. So that is a long, long time ago, especially when we're measuring.
No, it wasn't. Take that
back. I know. I remember when it was released. And I was like, oh, what is this? That was 25 years ago. That was a whole adult child ago. That's how I measure it. So this was really in response to the way that most software was developed at the time, which was the waterfall process. Well, actually, there were two ways. One is that you would just sort of ad hoc, just kind of do it. That was one way. And the other way was like, you would actually go through this actual process and you would like create a specification and gather all these requirements and create your design. And then you would build it. And then you would test it out with some people and then you would release it. But that time period was measured in months to years between sort of the beginning planning of it to the actual release. So when Claris switched to an agile process, I was actually very, very pleased because my understanding was that Claris for a long time had just been using waterfall. And so you would get these 18-month release cycles and really we have to move faster than that in software development today. And plus, requirements change. You don't want it to take that long before it gets into the user's hands so that they can give you feedback on whether what they say they wanted is actually what they wanted. I mean, that's the thing that we always run into. And it's like, yes, I see that you built the thing that I said with my words, but that's not what I need. And so these methodologies were created, like Agile, were to address that. It's like implement, smaller chunks, rapidly implemented, get it in front of the users, get that feedback so that you can iterate. And so you don't have just like this huge release that is actually met with a big thud because it doesn't do what they needed it to do. And I think one of the big things and one of the things that drives many developers is they want their software to actually be used. And so if your software is not being used, then what's the point of actually writing it? So again, with other software, what we might do is we develop the feature, we sort of on a branch, we merge it into the trunk, and we kind of pray that it works. We've got multiple developers working on it. And hopefully, you know, if you do enough praying and maybe enough coordination with your team, you mostly don't have any merge conflicts. But then we think about the FileMaker process. And because FileMaker is a unified binary with both code and data, we've only had two options. You know, at Proof, we tried to like use subversion and everything like that. And ultimately, what we realized is that the only way that you could really approach it with multiple developers is if you confined everything to a single file. That was the only way to sort of do offline development. Because otherwise you would get conflicts. Like somebody would make a change to the offline file, somebody else make the change to the offline file. We would both commit it to subversion, and then there would be a conflict because and it's like, oh, I told you not to modify that file. I had that file. And you're like, no, but I need to make this change to the file. And then your changes are all messed up. So fortunately, with FileMaker 17, we got the FileMaker developer tool. So at least when we're doing offline development, we can quickly get it back in with the data. But we still had the problem with developing it live versus offline. So a lot of developers have switched to live development on the server, not necessarily live on production, but sometimes we do live production development because there are different disruptions that happen when you do it in an offline copy or in a dev copy. You know, you've got this downtime thing that you have to worry about. Even with the developer tool, sometimes that means hours and the business can't actually afford that. So you have to really plan that releases. So in both things, we always had problems. So with live development, you hoped you took a backup because you're doing it live on production. You're hoping you're not disrupting users. You're hoping that you did all of the error trapping you need. And then you really screwed things up.
No, 2:30. 3:50.
None of us has actually done this, I don't think. At least nobody that I know has actually done this. Certainly no professional FileMaker shop will have ever done this. Then there's the other way, which is you do the off hours importing and who knows what. So one of the things that we start doing is we start doing the developer staging process. And this is where QA enters it. And the idea behind adding QA to the process is you actually look at what's happening in the lifecycle of the software. You've got your development, which is where your programmers are running amok. Then you've got your staging environment, which is where we're actually doing some testing. Some of it might be automated even. We'll kind of figure that out. And then also some manual testing to make sure that the bugs don't actually get to the user. And then you actually deploy that to production. Once it's actually past QA testing, the software is delivered to the production environment. All of your users are happy, and you know everything is great, which is always the problem. So there's a couple of disadvantages with this. One is that it's merging, because as of today, and I understand that Claris has been working on a tool for a while, but as of today, we don't have merging. FileMaker is still a binary, and if you make changes to an offline copy, what we have now with the developer tool is we're replacing that file. So we take the schema, the structure of the old file, and then we hydrate it with the data from the production file, and then we put that up on the server. Because we don't have the ability to take like, oh, I just worked on this one little bit. Let's just merge that into the production file. It doesn't work that way. The second disadvantage, and this is where DevOps comes into play, which is this problem. And we run into this in web development, and we run into this in FileMaker development. it's this problem. It's like you've worked on this thing, you've actually tested it, you've had other people maybe even look at it and test it, and everything looks good, and then you deploy it to production, and then it doesn't work. And the question is, what happened here? Like, why do we get to this point? Why do we get to this point where even when we've followed the whole process the way that we think it should work, it still is broken? And this is where I think DevOps enters the story. So DevOps isn't a fix for software deployment. It's actually a cycle, it's a loop. That's why it's typically whenever you see a DevOps icon, it's, and I realized at some point, like, especially when I was doing the Claris Engage presentation, I was like, oh, this looks a lot like our company logo. And this isn't actually a vendor session. So, but like, there's a reason that, and actually the story behind our company logo has nothing to do with DevOps. I think it actually has to do with alcohol or something like that. But it's actually a cycle here. So when we're looking at DevOps, we're looking at a process where each step feeds into the next step. So we start with planning the software, we code the software. Notice that there's all of these different phases. The coding of the software is just one small part of the phase. There's actually 8 different parts of this, and coding is just one of them. So at Proof, we actually think that planning is probably the most important part. We do a lot of design first development. And so we really, especially when client budgets will allow for it, we really get in there and try to figure out what is it that the users actually need and how can we deliver that to them before we actually start opening up FileMaker at all or opening up our coding tool. We don't get to that point until we actually have interrogated the users, what their goals are, how they need to get there, what are the constraints, etc. And the DevOps process really feeds into that because we start out with planning, then we move to coding, then we actually build the software. With FileMaker, you're working in a low-code environment, so there's not really much to build. We do the testing, we create a release. The release part here, this is usually where in an ideal environment, we have what's called a UAT server, user acceptance testing. The testing part that's part of the dev cycle, that's really about your unit tests, about your automated testing. After the release point, that's where it's like, oh, this is okay to get in front of some users. Now we got to get user acceptance testing. That's where they're actually going through, trying to use the software, figuring out like, hey, does this actually do what I need? Have we missed some things? Have we overshot on some things? So we approach it from the perspective of, we're going to have actual 2 testing cycles here. And it's only after you pass the first, like if it doesn't pass the unit tests, we're not going to release it. Like there's no point in releasing it to anybody because we need to pass all the unit tests that we've created. Once we've released it, once it's passed user acceptance testing, that's when we actually are deploying it to production. And usually with most software development, that's where it ends. We just, we've deployed it, everybody congratulates themselves, we ship something, and now we can all go home. But in reality, then there's a whole process of operating it. And this is really where DevOps comes together. Because you're operating the software and things are happening with the software. Maybe some bugs are being discovered during the operation of it. Maybe we're running into some performance problems. Maybe we find that the web publishing engine or the FMDiSC is crashing on server. Or maybe we're, running out of disk space rapidly, or the CPU is pegged at 99% on the server. All of those things are happening while the software is being used by the users. And so we need a team that's actually running the software and monitoring that software so that they can provide feedback to the development team about, hey, here are some issues that are happening while running the software. And then the development team can take that information and plan on how they're going to fix it as part of that cycle. Does that make sense to people?
That does. Corin, there was a question in the chat by Lynn. had asked if anyone had seen any AI system that can do quality assurance testing on a system. And so I'm curious if you would be willing to speak at all a little bit about
Sure.
how you guys do testing and if you've looked at incorporating AI into that. And then also monitoring, if you have users, it's kind of an interesting idea to think of the users as part of your DevOps team. But do you like embed any sort of monitoring stuff to capture latency or anything like that? Or what sort of canaries in the coal mine do you install up maybe at the server level to say, hey, we're having a performance hit?
Right. Okay, so let me take the AI thing first. The AI systems so far are really great at unit testing. In fact, all of our web development using Cursor will write the tests for us as it's building the software. And then we just review those tests, make sure that the tests are actually testing what we think. I mean, again, the AI systems aren't there yet where we can just sort of press a button and let it go. But they are really good at taking away all of the typing that we would have had to have done. So when we create software, once we've created all the rules for Cursor, all the guidelines that it has to follow to actually generate something, we review the code. We have Cursor fix the code itself, which is also amazing. And then we have Cursor write the unit tests and run those unit tests and make sure that it passes all of those tests. So in terms of like our web development, and then absolutely, like it does all of the unit testing for us, any of that stuff. It will also do some performance testing with some of the other libraries out there that are available. Nothing that I've seen actually does actual QA testing in the sense of like, does this look right? We still rely on human people to do that, but it is pretty impressive in terms of how we can get that feedback. So a lot of times what we'll do for some sort of QA testing in terms of user acceptance is we'll take a screenshot of the output of the actual software running, and we'll provide that right back to Cursor and say, hey, here's a screenshot of the thing that you just built running, and this is wrong and this is wrong about it. And Cursor will look at that screenshot and say, oh, yes, I see what's wrong, and it will fix it. So it's still a manual process there, but in terms of the ability for it to do some sort of have feedback in terms of what the actual finished project process is, rather than just the code, like, hey, I wrote this function, does a function work? It can do that, but still it requires a little bit of manual input in terms of doing that. I haven't found anything for FileMaker yet in terms of any of this sort of automated testing, like nothing that can write unit tests. Todd has certainly been working on his FileMaker code generation tool. I think it's a logical next step after you're generating the code automatically using AI, that you can start writing the tests automatically using AI. But we haven't gotten there yet. But certainly, I think that's where we're heading. We're heading towards having this whole thing sort of facilitated by AI, both in the coding and in the test writing for that.
With Cursor, do you have any concerns about intellectual property escaping into the model or anything like that, or are you just
no? Because a lot of time we use, I mean, we have a professional license for Cursor, so we have it organizationally, we have it set up in privacy mode, so that none of that goes back into the model. And again, of course, we have to just trust them that it's working that way. But Cursor's using multiple LLMs as part of its process, and it really is a trust thing right now. It's like we've set all the settings to say, don't let any of our IP be used in the AI models training. And we just have to trust that the LLMs that Cursor's using is actually honoring that.
But you're using frontier models. You're not trying to run anything locally and just go through that.
Yeah, not with Cursor. As far as I know, that you can't do that with Cursor, because Cursor is using multiple models for its code generation.
You can set it up through ngrok and do it, but yeah, you can't. There's hacks. Yeah.
Hacks. I don't like hacking things. I mean, actually, I do like hacking things, but I don't want to have
It's not really
hack
hacky.
things.
You're just using the ngrok to access the local model instead of a external model.
And are you replacing all three models with that?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't tested using local models, and I'm not sure what the if there would be any detriment or to doing so.
Well, they're not as they haven't caught up to the they're not the cutting edge, right? They're good, but they're not the best, right?
Right. And that's sort of the place where we are. And one of the reasons that we signed on with Cursor rather than we had been using Copilot. And what we found with Copilot was that it wasn't as accurate as Cursor was. So, I mean, Cursor gets things wrong on the first try, but, once you got all of your rules set up, it's pretty darn good. Like, there's less and less that we have to fix. So we found that with like Copilot, we were fixing things all the time. And I don't know if that is due to the fact that Cursor is using multiple models for its code gen or not. But we also haven't wanted to like really futz with it because like what was good seemed good. Certainly for other AI uses, we typically default to using a local model. So anything that has to do with data, that's almost always going to be a local model rather than one of the public ones. And I'm actually looking forward to the next version of FileMaker and what it's able to do with AI and with local models, making that a bit easier for people to deploy.
Well, I mean, honestly, LM Studio and Olama are the easiest ways to deploy local models. So you can just use that.
Wouldn't it be awesome though if we just had one-click installation when you're installing your FileMaker server? That would. I keep dreaming.
Yeah, and then you're doing it on your FileMaker server.
We have our own hosting service. I don't know. We'll just throw a really big hardware at it. Let's see. What was this? There was a second question, and I'm sorry, I forgot it.
It was about monitoring, and if you have any sort of tripwires to say, oh, this page isn't performing well, or the server's bogging down, or anything like that.
Okay. Yes, and I will get to monitoring and talk about some of the tools that we use, and some of the tools that don't exist for us yet. And because this is one of the things that when I was doing this presentation for Engage, that it's sort of I know what we do internally for our own company, but I didn't know what else was out there. And so I did do a survey of some of the tools that are available, and none of them is actually doing the whole thing the way that our tools aren't doing it, other tools aren't doing it. But we're sort of like cobbling things together. And I'm glad that the community itself is all moving in this direction, because I think this is really important to professionalizing the development and deployment of FileMaker software. Because, we have a contract with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and like any regulated environment, there's this whole process of like code review, and they do penetration testing and everything like that. And they have appreciated that we were coming to them with this framework of using the DevOps process for code development and deployment and management, because it gave them the assurance that we're not just some sort of fly-by-night company throwing some stuff on a server and potentially exposing their data, sensitive data out to the public. And so there's all of these pieces of it, and monitoring is one of them. So I'm just going to start with, I'm kind of going to fly through these because I think most of us are familiar with the development process of DevOps. Because what DevOps is it's actually two teams working together. What we've discovered internally here at Proof is that both of the teams, the dev teams and the operations teams, they're all programmers. Everybody's programmers. Like, not everybody in the ops team is a programmer. Not everybody in the development team is a programmer. We have like UI designers. We have business analysts who aren't necessarily out there slinging code, but they understand software development and they understand the process. Same thing on the operations side. We have some people who are just doing monitoring. We have some people who are operating the software. We have some people who are writing software tools to manage the operation and monitoring of the software. So that's sort of the tie-in between the DevOps process. Is we've been really focused on developers and not so much on the operations. It's sort of that throw the code over the wall model. It's like, we've done it, here's the GM, and it's yours, and then we run away. And so when I look at the dev side, the DevOps process is really about facilitating the automation and collaboration here. So there's the actual planning of it, which typically isn't happening in software, at least not for us. For us, the planning typically is using design tools. We'll use something like mockups or Trello or something like that, where we're designing the software and we're planning out the development of the software. We're doing sort of that agile process where we're breaking it down into chunks and figuring out how can we create chunks that are deliverable so that we can get this feedback pretty quickly. And like one of the things, for example, is, we used to use Jira. I used to love Jira. One of the reasons I love Jira is that it's opinionated about software development. And what we switched to is we're using ClickUp now. And ClickUp has no opinions, and I find that incredibly frustrating. Because if it has no opinions, then that means you can do anything you want. And when you're trying to work in a team, being able to do anything you want is not actually helpful. The coding part of this is actually like the easiest part. We just code. There are a few things that we do here with the coding. There's a concept called trunk-based development, which a lot of large software companies use. The largest one that I'd heard using trunk-based development is Facebook, because Facebook is always up and available. And so you can't really say, oh, we're going to take Facebook down and run a migration this weekend, and you just won't have your Facebook. So what they do is they do trunk-based development. All coding changes get merged into the trunk. I mean, they have to go through a testing process and approval process, of course, but once they've gone through those processes, they're just merged into the trunk. There's no like, oh, it goes into a release branch, and then that branch is just sort of waiting in the wings to replace the production branch. It's like, no, it's going to go into the production branch. So we use trunk-based development, and I think that works best for FileMaker because, again, we can't merge with FileMaker. You can branch all you want, but if you can't merge it, there's no point in branching. So we do our development on FileMaker server, on the dev server, again, not on the production files. We try to never, ever, ever, never do development on production. Even when people really, 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 really ask, pretty please, to do development on production, I think the most that I agree to is like, you can change an existing script, but you can't create any new ones. And the idea behind this is that I want to have something called the always stable trunk, which means if I'm doing trunk-based development, the trunk should be deployable at any moment. I should be able to create a build from the trunk and create a release from that, because anything that's happening in the trunk should be stable. That means using things like feature flags to hide stuff that are in flight. So if I've got a script that I'm modifying, what I'll do is I'll create a second copy of that script, modify that second copy, and then put a feature flag that says, hey, when, right now, keep using the old one, but when this is ready, I'll flip that flag so it uses the new one, and then the new functionality is there. Same thing with layouts and pretty much anything. It's a little bit trickier with when you're actually making database schema changes because we don't have migrations, but I have a solution for that as well. Once we've done the building part of this, then we'll actually put this on the staging server for testing. So this is where we're doing our unit testing, we're doing our integration testing. One of the things that is important here is writing code that is testable. And this is where there's more work, definitely from the development standpoint. You have to write things that are testable, and there's a way of writing testable code, and there's a way that you are not writing testable code. For example, you might have something that it creates a new contact and sets all the information. the way that we would approach that, like there's an easy way, which is just go to this layout, set a bunch of fields, commit, and then go back to the original layout. But what we typically will do is we will take the contact object as a piece of JSON. We will have a script that will accept that JSON as a parameter using whatever context it needs, create the records, update the records, etc., and then return a result back to the calling script. And by doing it that way, by breaking it into actually two scripts, having one that handles sort of the data operations, the database operations, and the other one that like packages it all up and then receives the result, we can actually create that as a unit and test that as a unit. We can say, hey, when I sent you this chunk of JSON, were you able to actually create this contact and then return that to me with the contact ID or whatever the test parameter is? And then we can also create a test that would fail. Like, what are the required things? So if I give you something that's required, that's a JSON parameter, and there are some required elements that are missing, I'm going to expect an error result. So we want to have that sort of ability to test. And that means that we end up doing in-tier development. I don't care about files anymore. Now that we have the data migration tool, whether you have like 3 files or 1 file or 20 files doesn't really matter to me. That's more of a question about what are you trying to optimize for. But logically, I think of my scripts in terms of an in-tier development model. I've got some UI scripts that interact with the user. I might have some controller scripts that implement business logic, and then I have my database scripts that actually interact with the database. And that way I'm able to test at least those last 2 layers. I haven't found a good way of testing UI scripts yet. I mean, I've used things like Eggplant and whatnot, but what I found with some of those tools is that you move something like 1 pixel or something, or you just kind of nudge a button over and the whole thing breaks. And then it's like, oh, I've got to set up my whole testing again, because it's just kind of looking at the window and expecting certain things to be in certain places when it's trying to test the UI. And it just ends up being a lot more work than seems worth it. It seems like it's much easier to just write a test plan and then have some actual people in our company test it based on the test plan and understanding what the software should do. And then also having that second layer of user acceptance testing, so they are testing the UI as well. So that's sort of the dev process. One of the things that I found that was kind of cool is I was looking at Devon, which is a competitor to our AutoFMS product. And one of the things that they do that I think is really cool is that they will have automated testing as part of their deployment process. So in Devon, what you would do is you would look for, you create a folder. You can call it tests. I think it's the default, but you can call it whatever you want. You can configure Devon to look for a different folder, and it will find all of the scripts in that folder and just run them and tell you if those scripts succeeded or failed. The scripts have to return, I think it's a 1 or 0. So it's kind of opinionated about how your tests are constructed, but it at least is doing this as part of the process. And that's something that I think Devon was the only tool that I found that's actually doing that. That's like automatically running the tests as part of the build process. And I think that's super important. It's something that I want our developers to put into AutoFMS, is that we're also like incorporating running tests as part of the process. Right now, the way that we handle running tests automatically is we have a framework called Testify, and we add that as part of the pre-build process in AutoFMS. We say, okay, when you're creating a build, run these scripts, and those scripts are our test scripts. And then if those tests fail, then the build will fail, and then the deployment will fail. But that's not necessarily straightforward. So if you're using AutoFMS, you don't, first of all, it doesn't say anything about testing. It's just like, are you running a pre-built script or not? So having it like up front and center, I think is important, because it also kind of reinforces the idea that you should be doing testing. You should be doing automated testing whenever you're doing something in terms of a build. So that's all on the dev side. We're planning the software, we're coding, we're building, and we're testing. And the plan, code, build, test, that's actually running in a loop. So it's not always going to release. what happens is typically one of those builds that has passed tests, you've accomplished some unit of work that you want. And then you're pushing that off as a release for the operations side. But the idea here is that the more of this process that you can automate, and the planning part, I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we can really automate the planning. Because that's typically talking with humans and saying, hey, what do you want? Does this do what you want? But we're incorporating the feedback from the testing into the planning part and going into the development and then back into the building part. On the operations side, that's where we hand off one of those builds as a release. And the idea there is that this build has passed all of our testing, and now we're ready to actually consider deploying this to the production server at some point. But there's some processes that we have to go through. We have to actually test this with the actual users. We have to look at, one of the things in terms of DevOps is kind of old news. The new term is DevSecOps. So one of the things that we're going through with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is whenever we're going to do a release of a software, their security team needs to actually do penetration testing and data leaking testing on the software to make sure that it's actually operating correctly. So it's incorporating the security aspect into the process. But I haven't found any cool DevSecOps graphics, so we're going to be stuck with DevOps here. But that's something that I think is incredibly important, is the idea that you need to be thinking about security as part of the entire process when you're planning this, when you're coding it, the building process, everything. All of it has to incorporate security as part of that. So on the operations side, the idea behind releases is that this is a version of the software that is ready for public consumption, or at least we think it is. So releases are planned and they are controlled and tracked. In terms of our software, it's the only one that I saw that actually does releases as an official thing. We have a tool called Automatic Cloud Console, which is actually free. I don't understand how any of this makes any money, to be honest with you, because as far as I can tell, the plan behind our Automatic Cloud Console is build it, give it away for free, and then profit. And I'm sure there's a step I'm missing somewhere in there, but at no point, it's like, wait, what? How do we just give this away for like, oh, well, if they're hosting with us, we're making money from the hosting. I was like, but you could use it if you're not hosting with us. Like you could be doing it on Amazon or on-premise service. And like, yeah. And I'm like, and that's free too? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, but where's the profit? But I'm sure, there's smarter people than me who have figured that part out. But the Automatic Cloud Console, what we have in there is something called projects. And I think that's the part where maybe they're going to charge for that part, but that's where it's actually release planning. And that's the only software that I found of all the tools that I looked at that are out there. And I've looked at a lot of tools. I may have missed some that, I wasn't either already familiar with or didn't come up in the various Google searches or searches in user groups. But the idea of like, this is a release and a release means something. A release is tagged, it's tracked. We know what that version is. And so when it's in operation, we can go back and say, hey, what release is that? Because it's causing a lot of problems. We can figure out what build it came from, figure out what the difference is between that build and the build that went into that release and the previous build that went into that release, and see like, oh, they made this scripting change and that introduced a bug that has now pegged all of our CPUs. So that's where we find that stuff out during the operation. And this is where operation is really a team of the people on your team, like the developers on your team, who are deploying the software to the server. Excuse me. So the members of the team are like, for us internally, we have an operations team. They are part of our hosting team. So when you have software, whether we wrote it or it's something that you brought to us to host, our operations team are going to deploy that to the server. They're going to configure all of the backups. They're going to configure the monitoring. And they're going to be partnering with the customer to ensure that the software is actually operating correctly, that the server is spec'd right for this operation of the software. A lot of times we'll have people come to us and they'll say, oh yeah, I just need a small software with like, we don't even do this anymore. We don't even offer these servers anymore. But at one point we offered servers that had, I think it was like 1 gig of RAM and 1 CPU or something like that. It was just like, people are looking at the $sign. It's like, oh yeah, I want that one. That was the cheapest one. And then their software doesn't work because the server they're running it on is horribly underpowered. So we just even stopped. We're just like, we're not even going to offer those things because, it's too tempting for people to try to save some money here. And then they're unhappy about their software not working. So we don't do that anymore, but there was a time when we did that. And our operations team is actually looking at that and making sure that the server has all of the resources that are necessary. All of the networking is in place. We can reach all of the things, like if you have integrations with external services, we're making sure that we can reach all of those things from the server, that there are no slow paths or anything like that. So, and that's all part of the operation of the software. And that's not even part of the monitoring. Once we get to the monitoring part, that's where we're using tools. We have a number of tools that we use. The biggest one is we use like Zabbix to actually provide the alerting to us whenever there are problems with the server. So we're installing a lot of monitoring tools. We're pulling the FileMaker server logs. We're pulling the top call stats. We're actually collecting the top call stats in a data lake so that we can actually monitor server health long-term. So we can pull all of these logs. So we aggregate all of these logs together. And then we can see like, oh, this is what's happening with the server. This is why performance is failing, or we're noticing that the FMSE is hanging up or becoming non-responsive here. And I think at one point there was a bug maybe with the FMSE where it was hanging up, and it was just like, oh, we can set up an automated procedure just to restart the FMSE like every 24 hours. And that takes care of whatever memory leak that we found at some point that is, I assume, has since been fixed in the server. So all of that is helping to reduce the amount of frustration that users have with the use of the software, and the frustration that they have in terms of reaching out to support. So we have this support burden now because, oh, my software's not working. Now let's go see. We can actually do proactive monitoring with that. The other thing is you can notice that this monitoring step feeds back into the development cycle. And one of the things that we get all the time from our operations team in Slack is we'll have a client, the operations team will notice like, hey, you've got a server-side process that's been running for 4 hours now. And they have software that's actually tracking that on the servers. And they will reach out to the developer and say, hey, this is what's going on with this client's server. Did you make any recent changes? Is this expected or anything like that? Sometimes it's expected. It's because we're running a big operation where we're moving all of the container data out of internal storage into external storage, or out of external storage into an S3 bucket or something like that. So we actually anticipate, and they're like, yeah, we expected that this is going to be running on server forever. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like we made a change, we deployed that change, and now whatever that change is doing is causing a server performance issue. And our operations team is on top of it before the server crashes. Sometimes we can't get there fast enough, but usually our operations team is proactively monitoring and informing both the developers and the clients that there's something wrong happening with a particular server. And then we're able to take that feedback, and if it is a development problem, then we're able to feed that back into the development cycle to create a new release to address that issue. So I think DevOps, if I were to give a summary of what it is, it's actually the merging of these two teams. Sometimes, it's the creation of the operations team. A lot of places don't have an operations team. What they will do is they will just release the software onto the server and tell the user good luck. For us, what we have done is we have actually taken this idea to heart and merged our developers with our operations people. Our operations people are writing software tools to actually monitor all of the server software, using a lot of third-party tools that already exist, creating the ones that don't, or creating the glue between them. I don't even know, because we keep improving and changing this on a continuous basis, which is kind of the idea behind DevOps. Like, I'm not even up to date on what all of the latest tools are that they're using. I know that we continue to use Zabbix for those notifications, but really the idea here is that we're actually building this together as an entire team, rather than the developers are off on one end, throwing the code over the wall to the operators and then sort of taking no responsibility of it. It's actually this collaboration. Now, the part of DevOps, I think, that doesn't really exist is the where part, at least for FileMaker. And this is where I looked at a number of different tools, and I could talk about them. I didn't want to, I don't feel comfortable demoing other people's software because I don't want to do them a disservice for it. But the where with DevOps is really tricky right now, because as I said at the beginning, there's not even of our own tools. There's no tools out there that manages this complete process from end to end. Instead, I think a number of the tools sort of, fill in some of the pieces, some better than others. I'll take something like Devin, for example. So Devin has this concept of a module, which I think is synonymous with a file. And you can branch that file and do development on it. And then you can merge that file back in. But it's not really a merge in the sense that you can take the code and merge it into the existing code. It's really just, I've taken a copy of this file, done some work on it, and then I've put this copy of the file back in the main trunk of the system. But it's really file-based. It's not really looking at it as a unit. Certainly, if you can't merge, then branching really isn't the right concept there. It's more of a just, you've got some software, or you've got this file, you've made some changes to this file, and now you've put this file back in place. But it does do deployments. So you can create builds with Devin. It does the automated testing as part of that process. I really give them props for that. And then you can deploy that to your production environment. And so it's filling in a lot of those pieces of it, but it doesn't have like the operations, doesn't have the monitoring part of it. There are things like 360 deploy, which was one of the earlier ones out there that were doing deployments using the FileMaker data migration tool, and before that even. And that's really handling the deployment part of the process. And I think, again, it's like none of the tools are actually doing all of them. There were a couple of things that I was really impressed by, and that I want to steal these ideas, but unfortunately it's not my job to steal them. One of them was Inspector Pro, because one of the things we didn't talk about is how do you figure out what went wrong between a release. So if you got a release and all of a sudden your top call stats are showing that, hey, there are all these processes that are really blowing up here. What we currently do in our company is our operations team will get an alert saying, hey, top call stats are indicating that something is going wrong here. They'll pull those top call stats. We'll put it into a more easily readable format. And then we'll kind of, open up a chat with the developer and saying, hey, this client here, we're noticing this issue on the server. Here's what the top call stat says. Can you figure out what's going on here? And one of the things with Inspector Pro is that you can just upload your top call stats to Inspector Pro, and it will tell you, hey, this is the script right here, this one that you changed. This is the one that's showing up in top call stats and is causing problems. And I think that's incredibly useful. And I would love if we had that feature as part of like Auto FMS, where we could automatically ingest those top call stats and say, hey, here's the diff between this old version of the file, the new version of the file, and here's what the top call stat says, and here's a script that's causing problems, and here's the change that you made, and fix it. There were some other tools that I looked at. And really, the thing with any of these tools is that none of them are actually doing the entire process yet. We're certainly trying to get there. There's a lot of challenges to getting there completely, especially because it is FileMaker. We don't have merge, so it makes it difficult. Somebody asked in the chat about the update tool. I think that's a step towards getting that merge. What's that? So that's a step towards having a merge, at least like where we can take small software chunks and potentially apply it to a file. Not unlike what the add-on tool does currently. So you have this little bit of FileMaker code and you can kind of merge it into a file. I think that will be great. It's not taking like two FileMaker files, diffing them, and then applying a merge to one from the other. It's not there yet, but it may get there. And so I'm kind of crossing my fingers, hoping that we'll get there. And then if we get there, we can automate that. Just like when they released the developer utility, the command line version, now one of the problems that we had with deployments with AutoFMS, we couldn't rename files. So we have, vertical market customers where they might be hosting 3 or 4 customers on a single server, and they just rename the files between them. And we couldn't really automate that process. So there was always this frustrating manual process to the deployment where somebody would have to open it up with the FileMaker Pro client and use the rename feature there, and then upload that to the server. And fortunately, Todd was persistent enough that we were able to get that as a tool. And now, that's one more piece of the DevOps process that we're able to automate. And I think the goal that we're really striving towards is we want to be able to automate all of this process. We want to, again, the planning, that's kind of inherently a human process, but everything else, from the coding, the building, the testing, the release, the deployment, the monitoring, we want to get that process completely automated and streamlined so that we're spending more time actually solving our customers' problems and less time fighting with the tools that we have to work with. So that is it in a nutshell. If I can show some things, I can show how we use AutoFMS or anything like that, or I could just answer questions, or I can take a lot of criticism too. Happy for any of it.
Well, we're a little over time, so why don't we just stick to questions?
Okay.
Hey, Corn, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been asking for a long time is something very similar to Safari Debug. So you have tools that allow you to monitor what's going on a layout. Like, why am I getting a beach ball? What is the connection doing? So it would reveal to us in real time, as developers, oh, I just added a value list that comes from 3 tables away, and that was a bad idea. So I would know right away not to do that, right?
Right.
The problem is we just don't have tools. We just don't have enough tools to be able to see that. And I keep asking for better tools like that. Yeah.
Right. I think we're trying to, to the extent that we can get data, we're trying to build the tools to have that data. But
yeah,
again, we're in the same. Yeah,
the real-time data is hard though.
Yeah.
Because
getting things out of top call stats and whatnot, that's one step of that, but it is hard because we don't have the insight into sort of those design problems. I know that base elements, when it does an analysis of a DDR, it will kind of alert you to things that might be questionable or might be performance problems. And that's what I want sort of real time as well. But we're at the mercy of sort of what do we get from the logs? And we can get hey, this layout was slow. This layout introduced a delay, but that's it. And then sort of up to the developer to be a sleuth as to why.
Yeah, and I guess just a quick follow-up to that was the event log is really logging errors, script errors that run on the server. And this is something also I've been asking for a long time. We would want to go to the server admin and turn on a flag for that file to be in debug mode. And we would expect, okay, it's just going to be slower for everybody, but all the errors, every single error from every single client on that file goes to one place. And then you do your testing, whether it's manual or automated or whatever, you troll that log and you would know like, hey, we just introduced a bunch of problems. We released something. We now have these problems. We need to fix them. And if you run automated, testing, and then you could look at that log and it's clean, you say, hey, wow, we're good to go. But we don't have that. We have half the errors are just getting, tossed out. And, they have this capability to write error log to your machine, right? And then you'd have to pull it and retrieve it. But that's totally useless. Totally useless.
So one of the things that we do with, I can't say that all of us do this, but I try to get everybody to do this, is to trap errors everywhere. Because errors are always happening. And a lot of people, the standard development practice is, set error capture on, allow user abort off, and just go. And instead, especially now that we have transactions, by the way, transactions, I think of transactions as error control, and that's it. Because they really only matter when errors happen. So it's really about error trapping. And then with Auto FMS, we have the ability to write logs to the server custom. So you can make a call and you will get your, if you are trapping the errors, you can make calls to Auto FMS to write those errors to server, and then we can pick those up and actually analyze them. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do to sort of address sort of the gap in some of that logging, is do the logging ourselves and then writing them to a central location where it can be analyzed.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks, Corn.
All right, let's do one more question.
Hey, I'll grab the spot. In terms of error trapping, we send it off to a help ticket and then we get a Slack. So if we make a mistake, and it's happened, we'll get an instantaneous message with Slack. And because everything gets written into a FileMaker database, we can make use of an FMP URL to go to the file and the layout and the record that they were on when the error occurred. So we make an error, but we fix it fast.
I have a sense that my Slack would be overrun. Maybe I'm not that good of a programmer. I don't know, but
I think we don't send every single little tiny thing. Like if we're in a loop and you go to next record, well, we trap for that anyway. Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I think in terms of our error, we don't necessarily go to Slack, but that's certainly something we could integrate. And I think that's part of the message of DevOps, is integrating all of these tools into the process so that you are getting the alerts that you need. And then also everybody bugging the Claris PM team and asking for more error logging, more access to some of these things so that we can develop better quality software.
Wouldn't it be handy if one of them was on this call and could be pinged in the chat?
I know. That would be great. You should invite someone on the call to take note of some of this stuff.
All right. Well, Corn, thanks a ton for being flexible and the great presentation and the great content and all the useful information there. So appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up on the agenda is the Tech News Roundup. So I will jump into that. Here we go. Let me share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Okay, so this is the May 2025 edition of the Tech News Roundup. And I guess I'd like to start with just a quick shout out to vibe coding. Todd touched on it a little bit at the end of last meeting. Jeremy Brown is going to be doing some vibe coding, and some people are like, what the heck is vibe coding? Which is a fair question if you've not heard of it before. The according to Hoyle definition is it's a coding approach that relies on LLMs so that you can just have an LLM generate working code by providing natural language descriptions rather than manually writing code. And so, geez, a few months ago, Chris Hippolyte did a thing where he wrote a little tip splitting calculator or a tab splitting calculator just using React in the little chat window. So he said, I want a calculator that splits the thing 3 ways or X ways, and it just did it. It just cooked it up in React on the fly. That's vibe coding, where you're basically using regular English natural language prompting to say, I want some code that does this. And you can either specify the code you want it done in, I want it done in React, or you could just say, figure it out, and maybe it'll say, you know what, I'm going to do this in Python and just knock it out for you. So vibe coding is a natural language prompting way of code writing. And there is and just to sort of show that this thing has legs, there's a website called fine.dev, Fine.dev. It's a vibe coding website, basically. If you want to write an app, you just start describing what you want there. Last month, they had 10,000 apps built on their platform. So this concept is taking the world by storm. Everybody who ever had a great idea that was going to change the world, but has no idea how to code it or do anything like that, can go to any one of these platforms. Lovable.dev is another one. And you can just describe what you want, and it'll just start knocking code out for you. It can host it for you. So these things are, arguably the future of software development. For a while, it looked like Airtable was going to be that. They had sort of this social media aspect to it where you could create an app and then host it there, and it was discoverable by others. So it was like app as social media content. And Fine and Lovable are the same sort of thing. You could create an app there, and anybody strolling around on the website can find your app that you put together or that you vibe coded. You didn't even write any real code for it. And I think it's the future. And so Jeremy's going to be sort of talking about this in a deeper way with practical examples about how you can use vibe coding in, if you want to implement JavaScript stuff in FileMaker, how you would go about doing that, even if you don't know JavaScript. So anyway, I just sort of wanted to do that little introductory piece, and now I'll delve into the regular tech news stuff. So off the top, Apple and Meta got in trouble in the EU, 800 million in antitrust fines. This is the first enforcement of their digital competition law, the penalties for breaching the Digital Markets Act were actually handed down sort of in the face of fierce opposition by the Trump administration. They see it as the bloc's unfair targeting of American companies, but they hit Meta with a 500 million euro charge and 200 million to Apple. And so this was the end product of a year-long investigation. The European Commission found that for a period last year, Meta had not given users the ability to use versions of its platform that process less of their personal data without paying a fee. So basically, it's like, give us your data or we're going to charge you for use of the platform. And this is a result of a November 2023 action where the company adopted a consent or pay advertising model, which forced European users of Facebook and Instagram to either consent to first personal data combination for personalized advertising or to pay for ad-free versions of the platform. And so big, these are basically speeding tickets for the amount of money that these companies make, but it's a shot across the bow, I guess I would say. Speaking of Apple, some news there. So everyone has probably heard of Anthropic. They're a competitor to OpenAI. They make frontier LLMs. Apple, who has had a lot of difficulties getting their Apple Intelligence features up and running on the iOS devices and Apple devices. They're out there, but they're certainly not getting any traction. I don't hear anybody raving about Apple Intelligence. They have decided to partner with Anthropic on AI-powered coding. And so, speaking of vibe coding, they'll be using Anthropic to vibe code on Xcode. And so they are Apple has announced some time ago an AI-driven coding tool for Xcode called Swift Assist. Was the name. It was intended to be released last year. It was never made available to developers. Um, and there were some concerns from Apple's engineers about potential slowdowns. But anyway, that seems to be the where this nexus is happening, where Apple and Anthropic are getting together to create Swift Assist. And so for you, those of you who have used the SDK in Swift and Xcode, you'll begin to be able to use Anthropic's technology to help you with your coding. And then Google is also going to be partnering with Apple. So they're going to add Gemini support on the iPhone. So it's the old if you can't beat them, join them kind of situation. Again, Apple had been struggling with Apple Intelligence. And so now you'll be able to use Gemini on iOS devices. So this is a big deal. There's sort of larger context to this. The search monopoly trial that the Department of Justice has been getting into. And so now Google, Anthropic, Apple are starting to get into all these partnerships to sort of make plain what's actually going on. Tim Cook has said that more third-party AI models would ship on Apple Intelligence later this year. So by sort of opening up the ringed garden and allowing other players in, it kind of lays to rest some of these anti-competitive tactics charges that the likes of Apple and Google have been getting. In February, Mac Rumors, a contributor named Aaron Paris found references to Google as an Apple Intelligence model choice in an iOS 18.4 beta. Apple already had some ChatGPT integration. And so this seems to be opening right up. And so just more choice in general will be coming to the platform. I see Ian's comment in the chat here that says Apple has completely missed the boat when it comes to AI. So I think this is a good pivot when they've sort of worked out that it's not going to happen for them, that they start to use some of these best-in-class models. Google Gemini 2.5 is killing it in code completion. So I think that would be a nice add for Apple. Also, and this is sort of related to all the turmoil around tariffs against China, Apple has decided to shift all US iPhone assembly to India as a result of the tariff issues. So this is going to be completed by the end of 2026. The larger release here said by moving third-party assembly of US iPhones to India, Apple could avoid the most significant cost pressure of a trade war, though India itself faces some tariffs as well, or at least they did at the time of this writing, April 25th. Apple had been shipping iPhones made in India, adding to the product reserves, but now they're doing it all. And then speaking of Apple, there is a new product out. It's called Skip Tools, and Skip 1.5 now has the ability to create a 100% native Swift and Swift UI app for both iOS and Android. The interesting thing to me here is that you can use the FileMaker Go SDK and embed a FileMaker file in it, and theoretically could use Skip 1.5 to create an Android version of that. I don't know if Rick has any thoughts on this development or this possibility, or if he already knows it wouldn't work just because of the embedded FileMaker file. But theoretically, you would be able to deploy a FileMaker Go-based mobile app on Android by using Skip. So I thought this was interesting. Rick, do you have any thoughts on that? Are you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. No, it's interesting to take a look at. I spent a lot of time looking at this a couple of years ago, and we got a long ways down, trying to fulfill this. But in the end, it turned out the licensing model just didn't work out well. So this would be interesting to pursue. But yeah, I haven't heard anything internally about this at all.
All right. Well, FYI, I just thought I'd share.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Microsoft. Microsoft has announced that they are making all new accounts passwordless by default. New users will have several passwordless options for signing into their account, and they'll never need to enroll a password. Existing users can visit their account settings to delete passwords if they want to avail themselves of this new capability. Microsoft says the best passwordless method will be enabled for each account and set as the default. They also want more customers to switch to pass keys, which is a more secure alternative to passwords that use biometric authentication, such as fingerprints and facial recognition. Those of you who have the little finger pad on your Mac OS device have probably already been using pass keys, whether you are aware of it or not. Um, Once you get signed in, users will be prompted to enroll a passkey, and the next time they log into their account, they'll just be asked to sign in with their passkeys. So this is the way Microsoft is going in the future. Obviously, passwords will be sticking around for a little while as they wait for people to sort of roll through this. But cynics have said, I like this quote, the ultimate goal is to enter the next phase of data harvesting and force users into sharing as much biometric data as possible with us. So the DoD is eagerly awaiting to buy as much biometric data as we can provide. So, maybe tinfoil hat talking, maybe there's something there. We shall see. In security news, Ars Technica is always good for good security news. A bunch of e-commerce sites got taken down. For those of you who don't know, a supply chain attack is when someone sort of burrows into the technology, maybe your authentication methodology or some code or something like that, that makes up, say, your website or your e-commerce site or maybe even your internal systems. And as a result of that compromise can then basically sort of like a parasite, live off the data that's flowing through those systems. So this was a supply chain attack on Magento. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's owned by Adobe. It's sort of like Shopify. The supply chain attack compromised at least 3 software providers with malware that remained dormant for 6 years. So this has been sitting inside the code for 6 years and became active only in the last few weeks. 500 e-commerce sites, at least 500 e-commerce sites that relied on the backdoored software were infected. They think the true number might be double that. The researchers from a security firm called Sansec we're talking about. The backdoor allowed uploading and executing arbitrary PHP code. The attackers had full remote code execution and could do anything they wanted. In nearly all the Adobe Commerce Magento breaches, they observed the backdoors then used to inject skimming software that runs in the user's browsers and basically stole any payment information they use to make purchases. In the case the specifically mentioned is a software module called MageCart. Among the compromised customers was a $40 billion multinational company, which Sansec didn't name. In an email Monday, a representative said that global remediation on the infected customers remains limited. So this still seems to be ongoing. This was announced on May 5th. So as you can see from the article on the slide here, the 3 software suppliers were Tigrin, Mage Solutions, and Mitanshi. And so they all 3 supply Magento e-commerce software sites. So that's bad. And then this one I just thought was kind of fun. The conclave is over, but I read an article about some of the security precautions that the Vatican installed for the papal conclave. And so they had the conclave inside the Sistine Chapel. And basically what they did was they installed a ton of gear on the ground, and then they put a raised floor over that. So they installed this temporary elevated floor to cover up a ton of signal jamming technologies. So they took everybody's phones before they went in there, so there couldn't be any sort of strategizing with parties outside the conclave. They used signal blocking tiles engineers to prevent electronic surveillance. They had blurring screens applied to the chapel windows to counteract any drone-based observation. All cell phone towers within Vatican City were shut down starting at 3 p.m. on Wednesday to eliminate the risk of unauthorized communications. And the whole building was swept for listening devices. Wi-Fi signals had been significantly weakened. Access between the chapel and the residence was tightly monitored, and all sorts of surveillance technologies, including drone detection systems, were deployed across the property. So it is crazy to me how much technology was deployed to elect the new pope. All the support staff, including the cooks and cleaners and drivers and priests, were given oaths of perpetual secrecy, with any breach punishable by automatic excommunication. So there you go. That's how you do a security lockdown, as far as I'm concerned. Well done, Vatican people. And then this was just sort of an interesting thing that happened in the news. Have you guys heard about this sycophancy in GPT-4? And so it was being overly obsequious, like you give it a prompt like, "Hey, that's a great idea. You're the best person ever." And there were some hilarious posts online about some of this stuff, and then someone posted a I don't know, it was like a screen grab. That's the word I'm looking for, of someone saying, "Hey, I have an idea for making an app that analyzes your poop," and then it had ChatGPT responding saying, "That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard." And so I just thought it was interesting how the pendulum swung different ways depending on whether they were trying to do the sycophancy or they were trying to dial that back. So the statement from OpenAI was that in last week's GPT-4o update, they made adjustments aimed at improving the model's default personality to make it feel more intuitive and effective across a variety of tasks. When shaping model behavior, they start with baseline principles and instructions outlined in their model spec, which opens in a new window. They also teach their models how to apply these principles by incorporating user signals like thumbs up, thumbs down feedback. So basically have it talk to you in emojis. However, in this update, we focused too much on short-term feedback and did not fully account for how users' interactions with ChatGPT evolve over time. As a result, GPT-4o skewed towards responses that were overly supported but disingenuous. So it basically sounded like a big toady when you talked to it, and they fixed it. This was sort of an eye-catching headline about Visa. So they are announcing plans to give AI agents your credit card information. And that sounds bad, except they would give it to your agent. So basically you could say, you know what, I need to set up an agent to do personal shopping for me or buy clothes or to manage my gas bill or whatever and conduct transactions on your behalf. And so they would only give AI agents that you had sort of blessed and said, okay, this is my agent and this agent is doing some tasks on my behalf. Go ahead and let it authorize credit card transactions, maybe up to $200 or something like that. And so that's what's really going on here. They're not going to leak your payment information to a bunch of nefarious actors. These are your AI agents that they will allow to have authorization to make credit card charges with on your accounts. And so this is sort of the future. So they want to have you let an autonomous AI model control your credit card to make purchases ranging from groceries to clothing, based on whatever budget you set, whatever shopping preferences you set. You could prefer certain stores or things like that. And their position is soon people will have AI agents browsing and selecting and purchasing and managing on their behalf. Just like the shift from physical shopping to online and from online to mobile, Visa is now setting a new standard for a new era of commerce. And so this is actually a good thing, even though it looks kind of sinister on first reading. So if you go to futurism.com, you can read all about Visa's plans for letting you have AI agents run amok with your credit card. And then this one was posted by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. California has a congressional bill AB 412 that could require AI developers to track and disclose every single registered copyrighted work used in AI training, which sounds good in principle, but they are scraping untold terabytes, probably petabytes of information from the internet. And the amount of data involved is an impossible standard that would crush any small AI startups and developers while giving all the big firms who have tons of money to spend on something like this even more power. So while it sounds good in principle, it would consolidate power to the wealthy AI startups. And the thinking is that the AI landscape is already in danger of being dominated by large companies like Google and Meta and Anthropic and OpenAI and um, I guess to some extent XAI. Um, but they're not the only AI models out there. There's, hundreds of AI companies out there, many of them with fewer than 10 employees trying to build something new in a specific niche. And if you put this same burden on them, they would be unable to train their models just because it's prohibitively expensive to sort of filter that information out. And so I just looked at the status of this bill just before we started the call. If you look at that link on the bottom of the screen, Legiscan, that's where it's gone now. I think it's voted to pass out of committee, and it remains to be seen what's happening with it. But that bill is still alive and still proceeding. I guess it was recently revised. I did not have time to look at the details of the revisions that were done to it, but this is in the works. And then this was interesting. This is just something I came across on Reddit. And you can see the sort of opinion of what this development is in the tail of the URL there. But basically, this user said, hey, I just asked ChatGPT about the impact of current tariffs or inventories on inventories over the next few months. And it returned a long list of toiletries I might want to buy. And the user asked why. And it said on April 28th, 2025, OpenAI introduced new shopping features to ChatGPT, enhancing its capabilities to provide product recommendations. So basically, they have sort of teed up the technology so that your local grocer can like push sales at you or stuff like that. So in the same way that Google sells ad space for search, OpenAI is now opening the door to, they're not doing it yet. They said these recommendations are generated organically without paid advertising, but that's now. This technology could easily be tweaked to allow someone to put paid advertising into artificial intelligence, air quote, organically generated responses to your prompts. So, um, keep an eye on this. So nobody knew about it. I didn't see any announcement about it, but this person just sort of stumbled across it by asking ChatGPT why it did this. And it said, well, we have these new shopping features. And so it kind of spilled the beans. Interesting information, though. Let's see. There is a research company called Hidden Layer. They have developed the first post-instruction hierarchy, universal and transferable prompt injection technique that successfully bypasses instruction hierarchy and safety guardrails across all major frontier AI models. This includes from OpenAI, from Google, from Microsoft, from Anthropic, from DeepSeek, from Qwen, and from Mistral. Leveraging a combination of internal developed policy techniques and role playing, they were able to bypass model alignment and produce outputs that were in clear violation of AI safety policies, including mass violence, self-harm, system prompt leakage. Their technique was transferable across all model architectures, inference strategies, chain of thought and reasoning, alignment approaches. And so a single prompt can be designed that would jailbreak all models. So if you want to know how to make hand grenades in your kitchen, it'll tell you. So once again, all these companies have set up safety features, guardrails that they're sort of known as, to keep harmful content out of the prompt results, but these people say ain't working. We're still jailbreaking these things. And then this is the last one. Electronic Arts cut 300 jobs. What is it? So there were 100 job cuts, IGN reported at Respawn Entertainment. EA has made wider cuts across the organization, 300 total. The wider cuts impacted EA's experiences team, which includes groups such as the fan care team and various others working on customer support and marketing. And so, I guess a game called Titanfall, which I'm not familiar with, but some of you gamers maybe, has been canceled as a result of this. But I thought it was interesting that customer support and marketing, these jobs which are especially prone to being replaced by AIs, were the ones that got whacked. So take that for what it is. But Duolingo was already replacing a ton of their people with LLM-based workers. And so it seems like EA is doing the same as well. And that is it for Tech News Roundup. Any questions on any of that before we get into the breakout rooms?
So the sky is falling, basically.
We're all going to hell. That's basically it, yes. Okay, I'm going to kick off some breakout rooms here. Let's see, we got,
Nice job, Chris.
thank you. Let's do 5. And off we go. recording. All right, Jeremy Brown is about to rock your world with a vibe coding exploration, as he has called it. So, Jeremy, take it away and tell us why we should care about this.
All
Why
right.
is this the future?
So, hi there, everyone. I was on last month's FMDiSC, and Todd did at the very end did some vibe coding with. I think he was doing a Java or a FileMaker calculation or script steps. I forget, but it actually really inspired me because I've seen a lot of vibe coding videos on YouTube. Like that's all the rage when it comes to actual web development. Some people say they don't actually do coding anymore. They just simply vibe code and they tweak it, they get it to work, and it works for them. So developers that I follow for years on YouTube and other places are moving into this, web developers, that is. So based on what I saw Todd do and what I'm trying to focus on is helping educate in the Claris FileMaker community, I was inspired to try some vibe coding with building JavaScript widgets, JS and FM widgets, something that I do for people that I train people to do as well. And just say that the training is going well. There are many people that are using building widgets now. They're coding it. They know enough JavaScript to get them a nice widget. In FileMaker, they know how to use JavaScript libraries. And so that's really great. But I thought, based on, again, what I was inspired by, I would try it in the environment that I've set up. And to me, this is not a gimmick or anything. To me, it's not a cop-out in coding. To me, it's just another tool that I use as a FileMaker person, as a now working, in JavaScript a bit. I'm always encouraging FileMaker developers to use the modern tools when it comes to development, using VS Code, using a code editor, using JavaScript libraries, using connections that we have to FileMaker. So I wanted to just bring all that in. And I think vibe coding is another modern tool that we can explore and use. So I want to just explore it here. I'm going to walk through a process from start to finish. And if my internet and the agent doesn't cooperate, I do have some backups to show you, and I'll walk through what I'm doing. So let me set the stage here. I've got this small, we'll pretend this is a client table of pros and cons, and they have asked me to develop a T-chart, a pros and cons chart that just shows these side by side. This happens to be vibe coding pros and cons that I have come up with. And so I want to build this into a widget using some vibe coding. All right. So I've got my FileMaker file set up, and we'll use that. This is the layout. And so I'm going to start with, I'm actually going to start with terminal, because this is where I start. This is a modern tool that I use to start to develop a widget. And if you know me, I have a development environment that I encourage people to use, and it seems to be working for lots of people. So I'm going to just quickly set up a new widget. I've got these commands. I'm using Raycast to help me type quick commands. I'm going to create a widget. I've got this little app that's going to let me create a quick widget using my environment. So I've got that in there. I'm going to create a JS widget. I'm going to call this pros cons. Actually, no, I'll just use JS dev for right now. All right. So this downloaded something that I'm going to need, a whole development environment that I need to create this widget for my client. So oops, I forgot to CD into that. Let me close this terminal. I'll do CD, pros, cons. There we go. All right. So now I've opened up this repository that I have downloaded, that I have set into my machine, and it's ready to go. On the outset, it's my full environment where it comes with a FileMaker file. It comes with a coding environment down here at the bottom. I don't know, is the dark theme too dark for y'all, or can you see it fine? Let me know if it's too dark. I'll try to make the text
The
bigger.
type is a little light, but it's not terrible.
It's a little, what?
The type is a little light. The gray on black is a little hard to read, but it's not
Okay.
bad.
Okay. So I'm going to start this up. This is what I advocate for people to use when they want to create a widget, because it just comes with everything that one needs to start to code some JavaScript for a FileMaker widget. It comes with a FileMaker file. It comes with all the scripts that are necessary. It even comes with some sample data that you could work with. So I'm just going to use this as my starting point. I'm not going to worry about the data that's in here. And I'm going to just start to create what my client asked for in this environment. The first thing I need to do, because I want to meet the needs of them, is I'm going to get the sample. I'm going to get some data out of here. I love using the execute data API script step. So I do have a script in here that will collect the data from that layout using that script step, or that script step to fetch the data. So here is my sample data. And feel free to yell out with any questions you have. Here's my sample data. So this is replicating my actual client's file. Their data is in there. I want to start to build something that works with their data from zero. And I can do that with vibe coding, because the agent that I'm going to work with will look at the code and help me understand, and understand how to build something from it. Notice, because we're using execute data API, it's an array. It uses that field data property, which contains all of the record data. It contains extra stuff, but that doesn't matter. So I'm going to just copy this and I'm going to bring it over. I'm going to leave all this scripting alone for right now, leave the client file for right now, and just come back to my starting point. In my development environment, I have a file called sample data.js that just holds some sample data. I'm going to paste that data in from FileMaker from that script step. So that's really all I need to do as far as coding. I guess I could do some, well, we'll see what the vibe coder does here. This does come with, again, like a starting kit of divs and some JavaScript. But I'm going to ask it to erase most of this, and I'm going to ask it to focus on building a T chart, or a pros and cons chart, within this window.load widgets function that will be called by FileMaker. So anytime over here I load this, FileMaker calls this function, and obviously nothing is being rendered. All right, so I'm using VS Code to do all of my coding. I pay for GitHub Copilot, which contains, every time I look at this, it contains more information about what I can do. And I've actively been studying how GitHub Copilot does its work. Since I pay like $20 a month for Copilot, there's a lot of ways that I can use AI to help me do some vibe coding here. I'm going to use this new agent mode that they call. There's 3 different modes. As far as I understand, I can just ask it questions about JavaScript or about life, I guess, and it will just spit out the answer up here in this chat window. If I ask it to edit it, it is going to edit my files that I'm going to work with. It's actually not going to edit my files. It's going to put the edits over here on the left, and then it's going to let me have the option of pushing them into my code base or not. But I've been playing with this agent, and I'm finding it a lot of fun. Again, if it's too dark to see this, let me know and I can change the theme. So I've learned this as I've done this. I've done this probably 20 times in the past month just to get a feel for how it works with FileMaker. And one thing I discovered was that I really want to start with a base. There are people out there, Marcus Swift is a friend of mine who is doing a lot of AI stuff. He has built a model where you can just start to type a prompt. Say, I want to create a JavaScript widget for FileMaker, and it will do everything for you. What I like is to start with my template so that I know that I'm going to be using this load widget function that is called by a FileMaker script that can eventually pass in data. So I like to have a setup, because I've also got in this a way to deploy this code to my target file. So I like to start with this. But once I've started with this and I've got my sample data, I'm ready to rock. I'm ready to vibe and see what happens. So let's do that. I'm going to ask it to, and bear with me as I type this, and feel free if you have any suggestions. Too dark, lighter, please. Okay. Let's see. I'll change the theme to a light. Let's try this. Will that work better? Does that work better? I hope so. All right. Excellent. All right, great. Thank you. So over here in the coder, in the agent, I'm going to start to say it. Let's create a pros and cons T chart that shows the data from sample data in a side-by-side column. We're using FileMaker to pass the data into the JS function called load widget. And that comes in as a string, which needs to be parsed. I'm going to hold off on talking about FileMaker right now. Okay, so let's just do that. Display a header above a header of pro and con, and then let's see, separate all sample data into respective columns. All right, so let's see what it does. And depending on how, if the agent is at lunch, oh, you know what I should do? I'm going to pause it for a sec. Oh, okay, so it's actually realizing that it needs to use my context, but I'm going to go ahead and add context, and I'm going to just say all of my open files. I want you to go ahead and use. There's actually, that's interesting. This just changed for me. I don't know why. So we have index.js, sample.js, and I'll just add the index.html. I'll go ahead and open it up because it does need a context. So there we go. All right, so that's a good place to start. So let's, oh, you know what? I'm just going to put the style in there because eventually I'll want that. All right, so continue. We'll see what it can do. So I just let it work. It's working on some CSS. It looks at my sample data. Up here, it's showing me which files that it's adjusting with this new icon, the square with the circle. And of course, it's telling me in here what it's going to do as well. So it's going to add in the index.html, it's going to add a new div with this ID. It's going to add some styles. And in the index.js, it's going to do a lot of work. Now I can review each one. So the sample data didn't do anything to it because it's just a read necessary. But here in my index.js file, it's created a bunch of code that I didn't write, but I of course use my prompt to define what it is. So we'll look at it in a minute, but what's neat is I can choose to keep it or undo it. This is basically like a pre-commit. This is nice because I have levels of keeping my code or undoing my code. I created some styles. There, it's all in green, and it did some index.html stuff where it added some divs. So let's see what it did. Before I keep it, I'm going to go over to FileMaker and run this, and there it goes. So there I've got that, and there we go. So it took my sample data, it generated the necessary spaces, the elements in the HTML, and it made it work. Great, so that's a good start. I'm going to ask it to, okay, so now I have to keep it. I'm going to say, yeah, I like this. I'm going to just ask you to keep that, all that stuff. That's great. Remove anything that's not part of the pros and cons chart. Let's see what that does. So now it's going to look at anything that I don't want. See, it removed it there in my index.html. It just removed all the div elements that don't pertain, and it should have removed the button. So it didn't see that actually maybe it, oh, it did. It found that. It was a little slow, but it found it. So I had this button on click that was added to the button, but since it was removed from the HTML, the code realized I should just go ahead and remove that from remove the function, the tagging of the button and remove it. So let's see if that works. There we go. So now I have it. Beautiful. Very nice. So this is a good start. Let's keep all that stuff. I haven't written any code yet. I haven't barely even looked at it. And then there is certainly a easy trap to fall into where you don't look at it and you just build it. But in my experience, these simple-ish widgets are good enough that the code that is developed, it will work, especially because I'm starting from this framework that I have, the dev environment, and it's good to go. So let's go ahead and keep all these and just load it again and make sure. Beautiful. All right. So this is a good widget. Now the data is coming from the sample data right now. So if I were to remove the sample data, this would break. I think though, what happened was, and we're going to look at this in a bit, but it actually hasn't done anything. It's just taken the sample data that has been imported from that other file and it's just used it. So now I'm going to tell it, let's skip the sample data and assume that the data will come in from FileMaker via the load widget function. FileMaker will send it as an object where it looks like this. So I'm going to just give it the shape of the object. I'm going to say data, and then I'm going to give it an array. So that's how I set it up inside of in the FileMaker script. Use this and use this data. All right. So all I did is I told it, let's remove the sample data because right now it's using the sample data in the code and it's producing a really nice JavaScript function here that's creating the line elements. So now I'm going to ask it to remove that sample data and we're going to see what it does. This is what I love about vibe coding is in my time with it, Vibe and I have gotten along pretty well, and it's actually taught me a lot about JavaScript because it teaches me that I'll show you as soon as it gets done, and it explains it very well over here, and I really appreciate that. I like that. It only worked on the index file, so I'll keep that. What it did is, so here's the window.load function. It brings in FM data. So I like that it's using the word FM data as my variable. I don't use that typically when I create a widget by hand, but I actually like that idea because it is FM data. Now it's going to look at the data and it's going to try and see if it's able to work. So when FileMaker sends data from the FileMaker script into the web viewer via this function, it's going to come in as a string. So this is a quick test to say if FileMaker data exists and I can reach into that object because it's assuming it's an object and I can find the data array, then go ahead and run this function that creates the chart. If not, tell me that there's an error and then populate it with empty. So I'm just going to let this run and see what happens. My script, my load widget script is pre-built to let's see here. What is the get data going to do? It's just going to return. I'm just going to have it return an empty array right now. Normally in this script, I would work to fetch the data, and I will do that in a minute, but let's see what it does. All right, so this is great. It's telling me in an error here that the data from FileMaker is not expected format or is missing. So I'm going to tell it when FileMaker sends data, it is a string. So we need to update it to work in the JS. So this is great because this is a catch that we all have to remember as FileMaker developers, that whenever we're sending an object or an array, when we're sending JSON in, we have to parse it to be ready. So it does some good stuff. And here's a great catch that I wasn't doing as a FileMaker JavaScript developer. The data comes in and, oh, it's removing that. Instead, it's going to call it a string. So that's even better. because it's clarifying that it's FileMaker data that's a string, and it's going to now test the data. It's gonna try to JSON parse it, which I teach everybody that's the first thing we do when we get the data from FileMaker. And if it tries that and it works just fine, then it's going to be good. Otherwise, there's an error. So I like that. I think it's good. This is, I in a recent JavaScript, JS and FM office hours, we talked about this try catch block, which is something fairly new for me, but it makes complete sense that we should test the data that's coming in. All right, so let's run that. Okay, so we're not getting an error anymore. I can open this up. We're not getting an error. That's great. So it just now, FileMaker is just not sending any data, but the data it's sending a blank object in, or it's sending an object with an empty property called data. So we're good. So here's where I would throw away the dev file and I would go to my real file. So let's go over to that. I forget which one it was. I have so many of them called pros cons. I think it's this one. Yep, this one contains the actual data. So I've replicated this, the web viewer and the scripting over here. And so now the code base that I'm working with, because it's running in development mode here down in the terminal, it is actually using the real data from FileMaker. If I come up here and I change this to, it is a great learning tool, lots of exclamation points, and I rerun this, now the data is coming in directly from FileMaker using the process that I have, where my load widget script right here does the loading process. It goes and gets the data, and then it pushes the data into the web viewer. The JavaScript is going to catch it and trap it and do anything that it needs to do with it. So let's keep on going with this, because now I'm in the real client's file, and that's great. I'm using the real data. That's awesome. So no, let's do some more with this. If you have any ideas, throw it at me, and we'll see what we can vibe with it. One thing I want to do is, let's see. Do I like how this looks? Actually, let's do this. Add a row click that will run a FileMaker script called, I think I have one set, open add idea. Called open add idea. I don't know why I did that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. All right. I forgot to tell it to do something, but maybe it'll catch it. Because the point of me, I guess, row clicking on one of these is to be able to open up that actual record and see more details about it. But now it's added a bunch of stuff where it's going to, for each list item, it's going to add an event listener, and then it's going to, oh, it does that. It's actually, oh, this is interesting. I've never seen it do this. The field data, so it's got the script name, it's got the primary key of the record. That's great. And now it's using the FMP URL. That's really interesting. I don't like that idea. Instead of using FMP URL, I'll just do that. Run a, let's see, call FileMaker.perform script, where the script name and the ID of the record are parameters. All right, so we'll do this, and then we're gonna move on to some interesting ideas with this, but let's see what this does. This is neat. It does remember that the symbol, the $ means that it's open, but there we go. Okay. So this is adding a lot of code. Some great comments. It commented out what it used to have. Let's see, FileMaker.perform script, got the script name and the primary key. This is interesting too. It's checking to see if the FileMaker library has been loaded. And if so, then go ahead and run this. I don't see that that's necessary because of the way that I do this, but I'll just leave it for now. All right, so let's see if that works. So let's see, where am I? All right, so we'll load it up and we'll click, and there we go. So it's running my script. So Script needs some work to find that record, but that is what is happening. Okay, so it's really added a lot of stuff that I need. It's building a widget. Now, one thing I don't like about this is it's too generic looking. So if I were in a client file, the client has spent a lot of time making sure their theme is tuned to what they want. And that's always been a tough part of a widget, is to get the theme to work, the style to work. But with vibe coding, we don't really have that problem anymore. I can go to an example of their theme, an example layout of their theme, and I'm just going to use this image right here. So I've actually changed this layout to be that theme. And right now, this doesn't look too bad, but I'm going to try to use that image in my vibe coding session. I'll add it to the image and I'll say, restyle the T chart, the pros, I'll just pros and cons chart to match this image. All right. So I still got all those files open so that it can take a look at what it needs to do. I assume it's going to go into the CSS and make some changes. Let's see if it's done yet. So as this is working, I've said this a few times, the JavaScript is the JavaScript that is written, there's a lot of it in here, but it's actually teaching me how to be a better JavaScript developer, and it's doing things that I think are correct for the most part. It is trying the data before it tries to push it into the function that renders things, and it's making sure that that FileMaker is loaded before it tries to run that script. It's actually, or that function from that library. It's actually doing a lot of good work there. There's a ton of comments in here, which I think are great. And there's a lot of code in here as well. So I might have written it a little bit less, but this is pretty good. Normally what I would do is all of the inside of my window function load widget, I would just put all of the code in there. But what it has done is it has written a function called populate pro con chart with the data to display. And that's what's, after it runs through all the tests, it throws it calls that function with the data that is safe to pass in. So let's see what it did there. Oh, look at that. So now I have a pretty good style, pretty good theme match to my client theme. I don't know how old this theme is. I can't remember when it was created, but this matched pretty well. Good. So let's see here. What else can we do with this? Oh, you know what? I know. I'm gonna the client didn't ask for this, so I probably don't need to do it, but let's add some animation to each line item and let it fade in as it is rendered. I don't know, something like that. Let's see if it can do this. I might have to, we'll see what it comes up with, and if it doesn't work for what I'm interested in, I'll ask it to use a JavaScript library. Looks like it's going to just update my CSS to have a bunch of keyframes. Okay, let's see what that does. It's updating some JavaScript. All right. So I think I've spent a lot of time on this already. I have barely looked at the code. I probably, in my real work, I probably would take more time to look at what it's doing. But for now, we'll just see how this works. Oh, look at that. Very nice. Okay. So within a matter of a couple minutes here, I was able to create a widget using some vibe coding. This is simple. And this is actually, to me, this is a legitimate way to display data inside of a customer's app. If they want a report of record data and they want it split into columns like this, this is a very good way to do that. And I was able to code it pretty quickly with just the vibe stuff. I love that I can change the theme of it. to match the client's stuff a little bit better, and that I can add, whatever I need to make this whole thing work. So this tool helped me develop this widget very nicely. This tool developed the code within the structure and the framework of how I write widgets for FileMaker. It also respects how FileMaker passes in data and how you need to, prep it for being used. And this isn't really doing anything with vibe coding, but since I'm in this framework, I can then say npm run deploy to FM, and it will, let's change the name of the file, the target file. So normally it's dev, but my client's file is pros, is it pros? Pros cons. Pros cons. All right, so this is the way that I can get the data uploaded, or the widget uploaded. So now I can do it. Oh, I forgot that. That security feature. I always forget that. Advanced settings, full access, allow URLs to run FileMaker scripts. All right, just allow, who cares? All right, let's redeploy that. There we go. So now this widget is inside of the FileMaker. It's inside of my client's file. It's in a table in a record called HTML. Its name is pros cons. So I can get rid of the vibe coding. I can say thank you Viber, and get it to work. So this would be how I finish off with a client. Letting them see the code or see how it renders in the app. So vibe coding is a great tool, and I'm exploring it with working with widgets. It's really good to start from scratch like this. It's also really good to take something that I already have and to apply it to a different context. So I can start with a full widget, like a full table of columns and row clicks and functionality that I built for one client, and then I can duplicate that code base and ask the AI to take this new set of data and change the widget that I've started to match a new instance, a new capability. So that's the exploration. It's not too crazy. It's a little weird. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Oops, I stopped sharing. What are your thoughts, questions about this?
I think it's very cool that you can just, again, like what Todd was saying, you're just thinking and speaking what you want, and you're coding away. It puts a different twist to this idea of low code or no code.
Yeah.
And I think that paradigm is rapidly being challenged in light of the ability for someone like who doesn't even know Python. Hey, write me something, to do this and this, whatever. And, mind you, you still need an expert to understand that, if it's doing the right thing or the guardrails for that. But again, it's fascinating. And, I think thinking more broadly, what you're presenting here, Jeremy, makes me think like a long time ago, many of us will probably remember Jeff Coffey, Six Fried Rice and Ways in Motion days, whatever. But and I had the fortune of working with him, a very talented developer. I remember, I think we were talking about when 7 came out, and his thought was Claris should just build the layout rendering a part of FileMaker should just be a web widget. It should just leverage all the web technologies, CSS and JavaScript and all that. And he said this a long time ago. Now, fast forward that to what you're doing here, And all of a sudden, it's like the reason FileMaker or Claris didn't do it is just because, well, there's a certain ease of use of just dragging an object, putting it on the on the layout, and off you go, right? But with vibe coding, who's to say that you couldn't be an expert at designing your layouts to be web enabled, so that you're part of a modern web stack, if you wish, and you're leveraging all the modern web technologies, and we're leaving the proprietary FileMaker layout rendering, and all the objects and everything behind. This is really getting us possibly closer to that. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, my perspective, having been the product manager that put the web viewer object in 8.5, is I love that object. It is so versatile. So we added that thing all this time ago. Then we added the ability for JavaScript to run there. We put in JSON, and now you're able to leverage AI tools to build interfaces. It reminds me of what Digital Fusion started to create some back in the 9 days, some fantastic layouts based on Fusion and all this stuff. But it's the thing that occurs to me, and I find this interesting, is really all about the prompt, right? And so you bring a ton of knowledge about what to tell it that you want to accomplish, but I believe we can eventually leverage these AI models to require less and less of you to know too much about what FileMaker does, and if it doesn't have what it needs, to just ask you, right? And it'd be interesting to see how far we can get. Someone who knows jack about FileMaker and pulls this off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of what kind of along the lines of what Vince is saying, and when you step back and you look at the world and everybody's looking at AI and going, oh my God, it's gonna replace jobs and all that sort of stuff. And there's some concerns and measured approaches that have to be brought there. I drive in Los Angeles. A lot of old people are like, you should learn how to drive with a clutch. And I'm like, I'm in bumper to bumper traffic. I got a bum left knee. I don't want to drive with a clutch, right? So I've got a car that's now got, adaptive cruise control, and it allows me in bumper to bumper traffic to kind of just really kind of focus on other core things. It doesn't mean I can take my eyes off the road, but it means I've got an extra set of safety guardrails. Jeremy showing, hey, guess what? You should look at the code and you should double check. But oh my God, isn't this wonderful that it can be intuitive and go, hey, I'd like to stay this distance from the car in front of me. I'd like to generate this code. And if you see something, help me fix it, adjust it, and whatever. I think it's a great aid. And Jeremy just sort of made a reference to FileMaker. The reason why so many of us got into FileMaker was it took care of the crap that nobody else, that all the other platforms made you have to care about, right? And this is another extension of that. So I think this is fantastic.
Yeah, to that point, David, I just want to add a comment real quick. To that point, your adaptive cruise control, it's a little bit like, imagine a car where you can on the fly tell it, like your adaptive control seems to be too close to the other car for my comfort. Can you make more room? And it would adapt and learn and understand and just go, so yeah.
I would love to, I'll just put this out there. I'd love to take anybody who doesn't know how to do any of this JavaScript stuff and just see if you can vibe something that works for what you're trying to do. I personally think it's good to start with a template, good to start with a framework, and that's what I advocate for in this development environment, because it has everything that we need to connect to FileMaker right away, and the FileMaker file that comes with it is ready for that. So, but someone could take this and just start from scratch and build something like I just did. I can see the code and I can understand it. I know what this line is doing right here, this function is doing here. But I think that anybody who comes here who hasn't had any JavaScript experience, they could read this and go, oh, okay, so looks like it's taken the list item, add event listener. What does that mean? Oh, I can hover over it and it tells me what it can do. So you're learning more about JavaScript here as you do this work. So.
Yeah, and I think under the hood, this might be helpful to people who know what this is, but really this is overwhelming to most people. And honestly, like if you had like a chat interface to a layout and just said, hey, you know, build this, do this. Oh, it's not doing the thing I want, improve it, etc. You know, they're just iterating on you know, speed of thought. And you know, like, okay.
Go to V0 Dev. You can do this, Vince. You just go to V0 Dev and it'll build it. You don't even have to look at the code.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And then what I'm saying is Claris should build it right into the tool and give up the layout rendering engine of the past and move into the future and just let us let us speak what we want to build and build it and then just put it in place.
And Bolt New does this even better, I think. I think Bolts or something like, yeah.
What I would say is I personally don't think this is overwhelming. I mean, there's a lot of code here. I don't think that the framework is an overwhelming thing. I've taught over 100 people in the last 3.5 years how to use this, and it's become part of their daily work. So there's probably something even easier now, but this was a great starting point because we've put a lot of effort into making this work exactly for FileMaker. And it's, in my experience with other people, it's approachable by people. But if Bolt.new or V0 can handle this even faster, that's great. So yeah, that's it. But this is, I'm using this a little bit. I actually will use it a little bit to highlight it. This is what I didn't show, and I actually have to run in 1 minute, or I have to get out of where I'm at. But I could actually highlight a portion of this and ask Copilot to help me update it a little bit different. So even if I'm not talking to it as an agent, I can find a part of my code that I don't understand or I need to change, and I can work with just that little section. Or I can click in here and I can say, write a function that when I click on it, will delete it or something like that. So there's a lot of possibilities with this. And I'm just exploring this. I don't know everything about vibe coding. I know within this context, within using the GitHub Copilot. And hey, I built something pretty nice to start. So yeah, that's what I have to share today. I'm exploring this. I hope it doesn't put me out of a job, but I'm happy that more people are using JavaScript to display data, to render data in some modern way inside of FileMaker. So if that means more vibe coding, that's great to me.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. And that ends this month's meetup. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Hey, one last thing. Check out the JS and FM community. We do office hours every Wednesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern time. I'd love to continue this conversation. We do delve into AI a lot more than I thought we would in the past couple of weeks. We talk about it every week now. But yeah, come and join us in the community.jsinfm.com.
Can you paste that link in the chat?
Yeah. Community.jsinfm.com. So
excellent.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.
See you next month in June.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.